if something happens, I'm kind of too far to go right away. That's the hardest part. And I miss family and friends. People ask me if I miss the food, or I think they're so far behind the rest, meaning I can cook my own food, and I can in New York you can find pretty much anything else. It's really family and close friends that I miss.
Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind the listeners that we have a Patreon account. So if you like our podcast and conversations we bring every week, please consider donating to our Patreon. You can make a small contribution as low as $5, and it will help us sustain the podcast and grow our audience. And now on to our guest. I usually introduce my guest, but I have made a few exceptions in the past where I ask my guests to introduce themselves. And I'm going to do the same today, but I can tell you this. I'm very excited to be sharing his incredible story of love. So why don't you introduce yourself? Can you tell the listeners who you are?
Hi, Sadia. So my name is Francesco Bertucci. I'm 43 years old now. I moved to the U.S. when I was 28, and I'm a designer by trade. I've been doing a lot of different things over my career. But my wife and I met in Rome in 2001, and that was kind of the beginning of it all.
So you were born in Rome, and you grew up in a place nearby.
Yes. I was born in Rome. I grew up in a town called Latina, which is south of Italy, south of Rome. And the big thing about Latina is a special town because it was created by Mussolini in the 30s. I'm not saying it as a good thing. I'm just saying that makes it one of the newest cities in Italy. It's actually a city of immigrants because a lot of people came to Latina to create it from scratch. Mussolini invited them and promised them land. A lot of people, unfortunately, died in the process because of malaria. But the ones that survived ended up with a lot of land. And over time, now I think it's about 150,000 people, roughly, that area. But because it was created by Mussolini, also slants very conservative, which is interesting because and it's the first time, actually, I think I make that connection between Latina being a little America in a way. Like, in a way, there's a lot of people arrived there that initially were very going for a new life in a way, looking for something new, and then at a certain point over time they turned a little more conservative. So I there's a little bit of that here maybe too. But
and how did that impact your outlook on life growing up in a rather conservative environment?
Well, when I was in high school, for example, politics to me did not interest at all because I felt like there was no conversation. I really could remember one person that was considered a communist. He just because he was, I had more ideas. There were more leftist ideas, but the rest were just grew up in that environment, and that was all they knew. So they weren't really like necessarily racist, but they just didn't know better. And so for a long time, until I grew up in the era of Berlusconi, when I think the first time I was able to vote, he was elected. And from there, he was there around for like 18 years or something. I moved to the U.S. way before that. But basically my first impact or relationship with politics was very much like, okay, there's not a lot of options that I can and really don't feel like participating. And not to make it too political, but I think that is a connection I never drawn before between my hometown and then, and the situation. And here I became a lot more interested for different reasons.
And we'll talk about those reasons. But before that, let's talk about your family.
Yes.
So you were 1.5 years old when your parents got divorced, and this was in late 70s, a different time. How did it impact your relationship with your parents?
So that's very interesting because it definitely shaped my life. I did not know of any other divorced parents for a long time. The only other people I knew that had a non-standard family, let's say, where somebody unfortunately had lost one of the parents. And I grew up in Italy, super Catholic, right? And I was going to school at the nuns, and they were not really well receptive or helping that situation at all. right?
In what ways were they not helping or receptive to
Well,
it?
I mean, they made me feel weird, right? You don't want a little kid to feel weird just because something their parents have done, and which is, getting divorced. That makes me emotional to think about it. The the point I wanted to make, though, is yes, I was a year and a half. My parents got divorced, and my dad had already been married before. They got an annulment from the previous marriage because my mother's parents wanted to marry in church, right? So the only way was to get an actual annulment. The unfortunate thing was that my father already had two kids, with two girls, with the previous wife. And obviously all these details meant something to me only later in life, or fairly recently, when I started considering myself, having kids and all these other things. Back then, the annulment didn't mean anything to me. Just and by the time I was born, the dust had settled, let's put it this way, when my grandparents on my mom's side had obtained what they wanted, which was their daughter to get married in church. Unfortunately for them and for everybody, maybe, meaning they got divorced pretty early on, like a year and a half into it. Obviously, things were not working, and my mom decided to leave. I'm really happy that happened because I much rather be in a happy family of any kind than not being in a situation where it's not fun to be. And basically, overall, my mom got married twice and had two kids, and my dad got married 4 times, and he had kids from the very first relationship, and then only acquired kids through the other relationships. But so I have technically 4 stepsisters, half-sisters, because I shared the dad with the first 2. They're 8 and 6 years older than me, and then I share my mom with the younger 2. They're 14 and 16 years younger than me, and I'm the godfather to the one that's 16 years old, younger than me. Just to clarify, now those are to me, they're my sisters.
Who were you close to growing up? What was the custody arrangement?
Basically, I was spending most of my time with my mom's family.
Oh, okay.
My mom also was 24 when she had me, so she was still in the middle of studying medicine, and she's an OBGYN and a surgeon. And in Italy, back then, there weren't that many OBGYN, so she had a lot of firsts. Like, I'm one of the first to get divorced, one of the first women doctor to be an OBGYN. And she was still studying a lot. And after getting divorced, she went back home. And I basically, the first few years I grew up, I feel like mostly with my grandparents on my mom's side. And I love that. My grandfather taught me so many things, and my grandmother fed me a lot. And so I have a special relationship with them. Unfortunately, my grandfather on my mom's side passed away when I was 12, 13. My grandmother lived much longer after that, luckily, and I had an amazing relationship also as an adult. We even came to the U.S. when I was 18 and 74, but that's a whole separate story.
I remember reading somewhere that growing up, you were closest to your grandfather,
Yes.
more so than your parents, I believe, in some ways, right?
Yes.
Can you describe that relationship?
Yeah, my granddad, I remember, like, Nonno Luigi, I guess it's fair to name him. To me, was just, my source of, I learned so much from him. He taught me math and to read, to write. I still remember sitting next to him and doing, going through the letters, etc., walking around the woods. He had woods in south of Naples, and chestnuts and trees that we would just go and, walk around and go get water to bring back home. There were springs nearby. To me, it's just special moments. And unfortunately, he got sick at one point, but I think that made my childhood special in that sense. I think my grandfather was definitely the good cop, and my grandmother was the bad cop in a way. She the one bringing back to reality and make sure I ate everything and would not let me get up from the table if I had not finished my food. So but to me, they were special. I didn't know what I had. That was just my reality. My mom was working a lot overnight.
Because she was a single mother.
She was a single mother, yes. For some time, she was a single mother. Not that long, because my stepdad, which I consider my dad actually, Walter, he came into my life when I was in a year and a half. So things didn't become officially a married couple for a long time. In Italy, divorce would take a long time back then. And so it was always a little not 100% clear maybe to me, right? And my grandparents were, I don't think they didn't really knew how to handle this situation, like
So
the
what
shame.
situation? Oh, so they were like ashamed of the divorce.
Yes, absolutely. Because if you think about it, they pushed so hard to get an annulment for the first marriage that my mom and my dad had.
Oh, because they didn't
So
want your father to be
right.
like divorced.
Right.
Like you're not
Yeah,
your
exactly.
mom
You're
to
not
be
married or
marrying
divorced,
somebody
yeah.
who's divorced.
Exactly, just marrying somebody for the first time, which didn't make any sense, but that was the mentality back then.
No, but it makes sense to me. I mean, the culture that I come from, divorce is still tabooed to some extent, although things have changed a lot. And what is interesting to me right now, as we are having this conversation, that, in our minds, we have our own culture and we have whatever preconceived notions about other cultures. I never thought there would be similarities between your culture and my culture, and I'm like seeing those similarities. It's interesting.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. I mean, there's some other cultures where you have to get divorced religiously, meaning, right, and to be able to marry again. So yeah, in Italy, that's the annulment in a way. It's not a common thing, absolutely not. And I don't know many had happened before.
So we were talking about your stepdad and how he came into your life. How did that relationship evolve over the years?
To me, he's my dad now. And it took me maybe 10 years to call him dad. I was feeling very much, I felt something special for him, but I also know that my grandmother didn't really want him to be my dad 100%, meaning wouldn't let him be.
And this is your maternal grandmother?
Yes. Yeah, when I speak about my grandparents, it's basically my
maternal.
Maternal, yeah. On my father's side, they were not really that present, I feel like. And on my stepdad side, they were definitely more present, but not as much during my childhood because they were in Rome and we were in Latina, so we would visit quite a bit, but different relationship for sure, much closer with my maternal grandparents. So what happened is initially my dad was not almost allowed to, let's say, discipline me, which I understand is it's just not discipline me as in just yell at me, but to take care of certain things because my grandmother was kind of in charge, right? and I think that made it really weird for him because you have this child that you love, and I know he loved me because he played with me all the time. In fact, I have amazing memories of literally playing with him. Like he is a big guy. He is also 6'8". And
oh wow!
Yeah. So, and I'm not that tall. So it gave me kind of an experience. Otherwise, I would have not had like relating to somebody much bigger. And that he was a professional basketball player in Italy. So he also taught me how to play basketball, etc. So he was present all my childhood, but only up to a certain point because he was told, this is your box. You have to play within this. And I think he suffered that. And then when he had his own 2 daughters, I think that's where he became 100% a father. And to me, I kind of miss that. I wish I probably had a fuller relationship there. For sure, there were some, conflicts afterwards as well, like in any relationship. But yeah, I wish I had a full version in a way.
So let's talk about your move to Rome.
Growing up, I was really good at math. Partially, I think, because my grandfather really taught me well, and maybe just an intuition. But everybody thought I could only do engineering.
Oh.
Okay.
And you didn't do engineering?
Yeah. And so initially I was like, okay, well, I don't know better. I like photography, but I don't really know if that I can be a profession for me. Because my mom was a doctor, my dad was a lawyer. So engineering was kind of the only option in that mentality. And so I signed up for computer science engineering, which at the end turned out to be useful, but I didn't graduate because that wasn't my passion. It was just something other people wanted me to do. And that led to 2-3 years at least of conflict with my parents because I really didn't want to do that. And so I pushed really hard to do something else. I started studying advertising, art direction, and copywriting. And that was the beginning of my career that then allowed me to actually come to the U.S. But the day this is an ongoing joke in my family, the day I graduated from advertising school, my mom said, okay, so are you going back to engineering tomorrow? Yeah, I know. Back then it was not fun. Now I laugh about it. But luckily, I got a job right away at an American company in Rome, and I went pretty quickly from an internship to then a job, and that allowed me to skip the military service that back then was actually compulsory in Italy. And that's also kind of a sliding door in a way, like a way.
And you also talk about how your mom literally like forced you to learn English.
Yeah,
That's something that you
that's another.
mentioned. I was doing research on you and I listened to your story, Corpse story, which was beautiful. And I found out that it was your mother who literally forced you to do that. But you attribute this, like the fact that you can speak English fluently and you were able to come and integrate in American society, to your mother's insistence.
Yeah, she doesn't know the gift that was. Meaning, I didn't know the gift that was. I definitely remember being forced when I was like 12 to go take this the most advanced English course I ever seen in terms of like in my life, and that was really focusing on pronunciation, and the first 10 lessons are all about phonetics, and but yeah, she kind of in the back of her mind knew that it was important to learn English to open my possibilities. She didn't know how far, and that I would end up being living, across.
Does she know how to speak English fluently?
No, not fluently. She understands some, but she never had a chance to study as much as I did.
So English is not part of the curriculum in Italy? It's not like taught in schools?
In Italy, when my mom grew up, I think she definitely had a chance to study French.
Oh.
I don't know if English was even offered back then. And then I think she studied just afterwards on her own a little bit through basically courses you can get on your own. But no, she did not get a chance. Now I'm pretty sure that, and even when I did it, I started studying some English in elementary school, but it was a private school. Then middle school, we had English, but I was still using my knowledge from elementary school. And by the time I was in middle school, I was ahead of everybody else because then I started this private course, and then that made a huge difference, and I kind of used it up throughout my high school years where I didn't study any literature, but I was really good at speaking, and my teacher was really angry with me.
So let's talk about your journey to America. It started in Rome. You met your present wife there, Lucy Harris.
President only.
And president only. And she was there to teach English. How did you guys meet? Can you tell us the whole story, the scoop?
Yeah, the story goes that I had, because my English was pretty good already by then, I had a roommate that ended up being American. And this roommate.
And this was in college?
This was in college, yes.
Okay.
I was about maybe 23, 24. I was introduced to my wife through this common friend that was my roommate, and she was an American girl that had come as well from Chicago to live in Rome and teach English there. So she'd been there for a year, and she basically told my wife, hey, why don't you come and do the same? You're in between, you're trying to figure out what you want to do. That's the perfect experience to spend a year at least in Italy, and just have fun. So my roommate one day, or fairly quickly, when my back then Lucy arrived to Italy, she goes like, well, I really met a nice guy. I think you should meet him. And so one day I get home and Lucy was there and introduced us. Rachel introduced ourselves, and then it was pretty quick.
So what did you like about Lucy?
I don't know. It was all new. All new. Yeah, I mean, like I had come from a relationship with basically the other person had broken up with me, so I was pretty heartbroken. But she felt very honest, very. She was beautiful and still is, but I think that was captured by the interest that she had in me and just how genuine she was, really genuine, like to the point that I don't think I met a lot of other Italian people that were as genuine as she was in that, like just meeting somebody. She was really like looking to get to know me. Yeah, and that was really exciting.
So initially, when you guys met, were there any, I'm sure every relationship has growing pains, but in this case, you had two different cultural identities as well. So coming together and understanding each other's cultures, what were some of the challenges there? And what were some of the surprises on both sides? Like, I'm sure you had some preconceived notions of what Americans look like or talk or who they are.
All over the place, yes. Because we spent more time in Italy in the very beginning, she had kind of a full immersion into my family. Especially my younger sisters and my mom and my stepdad, and even my grandmother, almost right away. And they're loud. We are loud. That is definitely a thing that is not part of Lucy's family. So that was an initial shock. But if you add being loud and not understanding the language, because initially she didn't really speak Italian.
Oh, and she does now?
She does now. She's pretty fluent.
Wow.
She could work in Italy easily, and she actually taught English to senators when she was there. And she talked to a lot of other people too, but mostly because she was teaching English and she was trying not to speak Italian in the beginning. And we were speaking English all the time because it was easier for us to communicate.
Do you guys speak in Italian, especially when you're outside and you don't want somebody to know what you're talking about? I do that with my husband a lot, like Urdu, but we do that.
We definitely try. Her family, some people in her family understand some Italian, but yes, we can definitely get away with a lot.
So you have to be careful around them, right?
We have to be careful around them, and I feel like in New York City, you have to be careful.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of Italians here, too.
Oh, my God, I didn't really even realize that. That's true.
And with Spanish, too. There's Spanish-speaking people, so you never know. But at home, we definitely speak Italian, especially when it's food-related, when it's more romantic, things like that. English is reserved for fights and for also communicating very clearly, making sure that
this is interesting because I cannot fight in English. There is so much that I can do when it comes to fighting. I always revert to my native languages, either Urdu or Pashto, because that's how I think. So my vocabulary is very limited when it comes to fighting in English.
Yeah, for sure I know, let's say, better words in Italian. Although now I struggle a little bit with Italian because I've been here for so long. Since 2004, and for work I speak English all the time. Now I even write in English all the time because I'm working on a remote company that is mostly we interact via chat. So my day to day is really in English, and so Italian doesn't come to mind. Although if I hurt myself, I might swear in Italian or something. But, but the problem, yes, if I were to use an Italian word, that would make it to my wife with the same intention, so I cannot have to learn. And I'm not at a point where I'm translating anymore, right? I've been here for so long that I don't have to translate. It just comes out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Thank God. I remember a period, though, where I was neither speaking Italian nor English, and it felt so out of place. And that was several years ago. Now I feel a little funny when I go to Italy and try to speak Italian, and I either don't know the latest words that come from, some
slang
TV,
or
TV show or something, and it just become popular. And that feels weird. But when I'm here, I'm basically mostly speak English, yeah.
Were you guys together for a few years before you decided to, marry? Or how was that process? What was that process like?
So we dated for a couple of years, and we were living also together for at least a year. At a certain point, Lucy had seen the passion I had for what I liked to do, which back then was advertising, and felt like she wanted also to study something that would give her the same, that we should channel her passion into. And so she decided to come back, and I supported that, and to go to school here to study interior design. And that was rough. That was rough because we basically spent a year apart while I was going through the visa. Basically, I came with a fiancé visa.
There is such thing as fiancé visa as well. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you never learned.
I thought
There's
it was
so
like
many
just
visas.
spouse visa.
No, yeah, so basically the fiancé visa is when you tell the American government you're coming here explicitly to marry somebody, but you make all the planning prior instead of coming here, falling in love, and because we actually met in Rome, so it made sense for us, and we had a lawyer that suggested that could take a while to get it, but it's not as questionable as somebody just coming here and potentially getting married really quick. And so we went through the process, and it took us 8 months, I think, from when, let's say, I proposed. I'd say because it was mostly a conversation. We realized that when Lucy visited back in December, and actually came with her family to meet my family, and we were not engaged yet, that basically we wanted to be together. And the only way was going to be to actually get married prior, because nobody was going to hire me and bring me with another work visa. And so we started the process, and by August, we were on vacation with my family. We received basically communication that I had to go to the embassy in Naples to do 2 days of tests, health tests and interviews. And she came along with me. We brought all the documentation, letters, photos. We had a stack of documents. And I guess we lucked out, and we had no issues. And a couple of months later, I was able to, October 7th, 2004, I was able to come to the U.S.
So you got married in the
But
U.S.?
we had to get married. So the fiancé visa means that you promise to get married within 90 days.
Oh, so you had to get married within 90 days?
Oh, that was
then?
quick, yes.
Oh, my God. And did your family fly over?
We had a very small wedding with just my parents, all my sisters that could make it, and which are 3 out of 4, and then Lucy's family, which she also has only had a sibling, so it was pretty easy. And we did it in our hometown, Concord, Mass. And it was really quick. We married on October 30th, so only 20-something days after I got here.
And then after that, you ended up getting your green card. But it took you really long to get your citizenship. And I was doing research, and I was surprised because normally when you are married to an American citizen, the process of getting even citizenship or passport is much shorter.
Right.
So was that a deliberate attempt to just prolong it?
Yes. Initially, basically, my concern, I had a green card, the temporary green card, and then I basically became a permanent green card. At that point, I was like, okay, well, I'm good. I can work. I can do pretty much everything, citizenship. And I think I had also a little bit of a trauma from filling out forms. I'd done so many of those that the idea of having now to study, Constitution and all those other things just scare me. And I had to also do other things like get a driver's license here. Oh, there was other tests. So it took me a while to feel like, okay, now I'm ready for more forms. And when I finally did it, it wasn't that complicated because, it took maybe 6 months. But the thing that pushed me was when I realized that, we were under Obama, and I was happy with that. But I wanted to contribute. I wanted to vote. I felt like, I'm paying taxes here. I want to make sure I can contribute to it, and vote. And I don't want to have to, even traveling was stressful because traveling as an immigrant, at least for me, was, okay, you have the Italian passport, and then you have to have the green card. And the green card was giving me all sorts of anxiety, losing it. Yeah. I had to show it for just ID sometimes before I had my driver's license. So it was always with me, and I didn't want to lose it. And when I had to travel, I had to, slip it in the passport, and it would come out, and it was just not fun. And so I wanted to make sure that, I could solve a lot of different things at once with becoming a citizen. And also, I'm here, right? I've been here for 15 years now. So
I'm so glad you're talking about all of this, Francesco, because normally people don't realize that even when we talk about, first of all, I don't like to make these distinctions and putting immigrants in boxes of legal versus illegal, all of that nonsense. But even if we were to think like people like you and I who come here and we have our green cards and then we become citizens, it's a long and arduous process. It's like, and there's so much paperwork.
Right.
And for me, my husband and I came, so it was like we were on student visa. So it was student visa first, then H1, H4, and then green card, and then citizenship.
Right.
But we were in it together. So we were filling out forms together, I guess. And that was some, I guess, consolation in a way where I was like, I'm not alone. And he was like, he's not alone. But I'm sure it must have been so difficult to go through all of that process. I'm sure Lucy was there for you. But still, it's It's difficult.
She was there, and I was lucky we had a lawyer that helped from the very beginning, and then over time, and so we're lucky to have that. And my English was really good, so I didn't have too many issues reading the forms. But I can't imagine even just somebody has struggles with that. It just breaks my heart.
Yeah. So you got your citizenship during Obama's time.
Yes.
That was a good decision.
Yes, that was a good decision. Yes.
That was a good decision. So going back, when you came to the U.S. initially, what was the transition like? Like a new culture, far away from family. Did you feel lonely, and do you feel lonely now at times?
Yes, to both. The first time was, I never lived in the U.S. I'd only traveled to the U.S. for fun. The first time when I was 10 with my parents, then when I was 18 with my grandmother, and then I visited Lucy before. So I didn't really know exactly what I was getting into. And I moved to the heart of Brooklyn, to Fort Greene, and everything was different, right? I had never lived abroad, only vacation, even in Europe. And I didn't have a job. And I had Lucy, which was great. She was studying all the time. She was still in school. And so those early days felt pretty lonely. Luckily, the internet was still already a thing, and then I could communicate with my family somewhat. But it wasn't as easy to make video calls as it is now. And you can sending messages was also not as easy, and actually was expensive. And I don't think my family was as much on email as they're all now. So that was quite a challenge. I was lucky that I knew I had a profession that I could get a good job with.
So how soon did you start working after coming to the U.S.?
So one thing I didn't mention before is when I came through, although I came with a visa that in theory should have given me a right to work from the get-go, at Newark they did not want to stamp my passport with the work permit. So they let me in, but they gave me all sorts of troubles, and I don't even remember why. But
I was going to ask you why.
Well, they didn't give me.
You?
They just said no. It almost sounded like they wanted to make it harder for people to come, and I did not want to question that. I was like, not. My lawyer said, just arrive here. We'll fix anything we have to fix afterwards, because with a fiancé visa, you're entitled to work as well. Because how are we going to,
Yeah, of course.
live otherwise? So long story short, my lawyer told me you could go to another customs and fix things there, meaning talk to the officer there. And I went to another custom here in New York, and they were able to stamp my passport, giving me what was my right, right to work. But unfortunately, they couldn't backdate it. And so I lost, basically, of the 3 months that was going to last anyway, I lost at least 2 months. So by the time I was eventually ready to interview, nobody was going to hire me with just 1 month of, potential work. Because by then I had to renew my work permit, and I hadn't gotten into the rhythm of filling out forms yet, or as much. And so what happened is, like, I did interviews during my work permit while it was still, and I told people, I'd love to work here, but I have to wait then for the actual work permit to be renewed. And when it was renewed, then in January, a week later, I had a job. So I was really lucky because I had a job that people were willing to wait for me for, in a way. But I can't imagine otherwise how stressful it would have been to have no income for a long time. I had a lot of money that I brought from Italy, but that was it.
So I was listening to your StoryCorps story interview. This was like back in 2006 when you had just turned 30. And it's so interesting because listening to your story now, and then I was listening to it like when you were 30 and what your aspirations were and what you were thinking. How has life changed since that particular moment? And you've been in the U.S. for over a decade now. What has been the hardest part in adjusting to the environment here?
So the hardest part, I think actually certain things have gotten easier because I've grown accustomed to everything from the subway to people, language, right? Food.
New York subway, that's a difficult thing to get used to.
Yeah, exactly. So, living in Brooklyn, we were living in the fifth floor. I woke up, I enjoyed every moment of it. So that part actually wasn't I think the biggest adjustment was for me, family. Absolutely. Like realizing that basically and I think I wrote it in that post, that
You're referring to your Facebook post that you
Yes,
made.
Facebook posts, yeah. And realizing that there's a lot of events, obviously, in life. And as you grow older, unfortunately, there's a lot of negative ones. Realizing that you cannot be there when you want, that's hard. I miss probably a few weddings I would have liked to get to, and kids that would have liked to meet earlier on than I did. I got a chance to go back, fortunately, for a few funerals, but that's the hardest part, knowing that if something happens, I'm kind of too far to go right away. That's the hardest part. And I miss family and friends. People ask me if I miss the food, or I think they're so far behind the rest, meaning I can cook my own food, and I can in New York you can find pretty much anything else. It's really family and close friends that I miss.
And nobody talks, or at least fewer people talk about that side of immigrant experience, where being lonely and missing your family and not being there for them when they need you or when you need them. Talking about Brooklyn, you said you live in Brooklyn. How has Brooklyn changed? Were you living in Brooklyn even in 2006? Did
Yeah,
you? Oh, so you've been living in Brooklyn for
I
almost
yeah we lived
for like
in.
what 13 years. Brooklyn has become extremely gentrified. What
No,
are some of the
absolutely.
changes that you've seen in Brooklyn since you moved?
As I said, I moved to Brooklyn in 2004 and left only a couple of years ago to go to outside the city in Westchester, and we fell in love with a house in a neighborhood called Usonia. That's a separate conversation. But we moved 3 times within 3 block radius. When I moved, Lucy had a studio apartment because she was a student, and when I moved, it was really impossible for us to work. Me to keep even applying to jobs. I remember holding a towel over my head, and so she could sleep while I was typing and applying for jobs in the middle of the night. And then a month later, we moved to South Portland, which is a beautiful street in Fort Greene. And then nearby, in 2007, just before the crash, we actually bought a place.
Oh,
And we were really happy that worked out. And we were there for 10 years. But obviously, gentrification meant that literally from when we bought that place, the value had gone down substantially with the crash, but then it come up.
it just skyrocketed. Right?
Skyrocketed, and we sold for way more than we bought it, and so we were able to buy something outside the city that is way bigger for something, like a 2-bedroom versus 5-bedroom, and it's like it costs less to buy something outside the city than something in Brooklyn. Brooklyn prices are insane now.
Yeah, but Brooklyn has a lot of character. So when I go to Brooklyn, and I live in Westchester as well, and it's a pretty long commute. But in my mind, I always think that, when my kids are older and when they're off to college one day, I will move to Brooklyn. I don't know why I have this fascination with Brooklyn. Maybe because of the restaurants and the cafes, and you go out and you see so much character. So why did you guys decide to move out of Brooklyn?
I think we were ready because we spent a lot of time already in Brooklyn, and we're feeling a little tight where we were. And Lucy had been talking for maybe 5 years about, I'd like to, get a garden one day. Yeah. And I also both had grown up luckily in a family in a house that had a garden too. So to me, it made perfect sense. But I didn't know better. I really didn't know anything else because we lived in Brooklyn, in Fort Greene, for 15-something years. So I said, well, let's go look. At least I want to know what's out there. Otherwise, the idea of suburbia scares me, right? And I came to New York. I didn't decide to move to go somewhere else. So I really enjoy every aspect of Brooklyn except not be able to find a parking spot ever. Not much time I spent driving around to try to find a parking spot. And I loved everything else. I loved the food, as you said. I loved how diverse it was. Yeah. I never felt like judge walking around the city.
Oh my God, that's such a good thing because diversity is such an important aspect of Brooklyn. There is no diversity in Westchester County. Do you see, relatively speaking, it's like you see a few people here and there.
Very, very little. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's something, in fact, that is one of the, there are great schools, but one of the downsides is that your child might be going to a school where there's absolutely no diversity. And that's...
Yeah, my kids go to school in the town that we live in. that has almost like, I don't want to say zero, that's like it being a bit too extreme. But yeah, no diversity. It's probably my children are the only two brown kids there.
Yeah, and we are aware of that. And in fact, I don't know what we'll do when time comes. We don't have kids yet, working on it, but yeah, that is definitely the thing that we didn't think about too much because we fell in love with the house, and that kind of drove all our decisions. We're driving around and ended up in this neighborhood called Usonia and saw a home, and basically a week later made a bid and was accepted, and we scrambled to sell our apartment in Brooklyn to make it happen. So it happened faster than
You thought it would, yeah.
I thought it would. So we didn't really consider everything, and that's definitely the downside.
So you came to the US for love. People have their American dream, this notion of American dream, which is so entrenched in American lexicon, is a myth in some ways, because not all of us have American dream per se, right? We come for different reasons. My husband and I came here for education out of curiosity, I guess. You came for love. Did your American dream, however you define it, did it evolve? And do you ever think about, at some point when you're older, going back to Italy and just, settling there? Is that something that you think about?
I'll respond first to the Italy part. Not as much, but also not as much right now, but also my thinking has evolved over time. When I came here, I was focusing on integrating here as much as possible. And then I started missing family a little more. And traveling became easier because for multiple reasons, technically, and luckily I could afford it. So started shifting things, but also my parents started getting older. Yeah. And so there's so many aspects that affect my decision. So I can't say I will never move. Let's say my parents needed me somehow. I have other sisters there too that could help. But also feel, especially towards the younger ones, that I'm the older brother. So I feel a certain responsibility. So who knows? Probably wouldn't move right away. Luckily now I have a job that I can do from anywhere, almost anywhere. But so that I don't know if I would move back. I don't know if I would move back. For sure, I would go and visit as much as possible. I'd love to take my kids during the summer for even a few months. Retire is so far. I think I can promise that. What's the first part of the question, though?
The American dream. The
American. So I feel like I don't know if it was ill in the when I grew up in the 80s, that somehow watching American TV was just most of the TV shows we were watching. So somehow I absorbed some of that. And so I think it was the fact that then I became open. I traveled to the U.S. when I was 10. Two parts of the U.S. that a lot of Americans have never seen. I went to the desert, Disneyland, the Sequoia National Park, Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, all at 10. So that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I think that's maybe seeded something to made me feel like, oh, that's, there's a lot more than just my small town. And so in that sense, maybe that dream initially wasn't really, for sure I was studying advertising and then working in advertising for an American company. So that idea, maybe I could relocate for a year or two, maybe go to Chicago because that's where the headquarters were. But, I was not dating Lucy yet until when I was 24, 25. So that wasn't really, I didn't really realize. Actually, I was scared initially that she was American, because I was afraid that she would just go back. And I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, I'll move too. So that was kind of a big jump to decide to come here then. But I wouldn't say it was necessarily out of a big dream. I'd say the dream came after. Meaning when I was here, then I started realizing more. I feel like there's more opportunity for what I was doing back then and what I decided to move into afterwards. I'm more of an entrepreneur now than working in advertising and designer, designing websites and applications and things like that. I'm really tied to technology, and I feel like the change here in this space has been huge, and the opportunity is much bigger than would have been in Italy and definitely back then. So this is kind of a newer dream.
I know we talked about this initially, that you were very close to your grandfather. If your grandfather were alive today, What's one thing that you wish he could see?
I wish he met my wife. I think it would have meant a lot to me. Everything else is great, and I think he would be proud. And other grandparents told me that, especially on my Walter's father, he was really good. Somehow I was really recognizing, you've done a great job, and I'm very proud of me. Although I'm sure he didn't really understand everything I was doing, because so new to him, I think I got a lot of appreciation in that sense. And I think it would have been great for my grandfather just to meet my older me. And I was just 12 when he died, so I missed out a lot. I know it was, somehow he knows about it, but
of course. And before we wrap up, Francesco, if you were to describe America in a word or a phrase, given what's happening right now, all the politics of it, the messiness, the craziness, the diversity, but also the bigotry of it, how would you describe it?
One word does a lot. It's
maybe a sentence.
Yeah. Meaning, because I feel like my feelings are changing almost on a daily basis. Like some days I feel very hopeful. We're talking about now doing the impeachment process. And so days they like really feel like you listen to somebody and it's like, this is a real patriots. And I'd never considered being in the military, but the idea of feeling so strongly about some values, that's to me what I hope America still stands for. And I know there's a lot of things that are messed up, but I hope those good values prevail. So that's kind of it's mostly hope at this moment, but a lot of sadness for what has happened, unfortunately, in the last few years.
Thank you so much, Francesco. This was wonderful, your story. I wish we could have Lucy here as well.
I know.
Maybe we can do a follow-up in, a few months and have Lucy bring her and then have another conversation. Because I would love to get her side of the story. But thank you so much. This was wonderful.
And I wanted to talk about my grandmother.
Oh.
The fact that, her family left her behind, and she basically grew up with this idea of the United States that she never got to see until she was 74.
Oh, wow.
But that's a separate story, so I could talk forever. If you want to do another one with Lucy, we should
absolutely do that.
Too, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Come back next week when we have another wonderful story. In the meantime, check out our website and also our Instagram and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @immigrantly_pod, and we are on Instagram @immigrantlypod. Come back next week when we have another amazing story.